How do governments fund cyber attacks? The biggest cyber attacks in history. Let me ask you a question. Do you remember where you were on the 5th of October 2021? That was the day when all Facebook services went down. We remember it in our hearts. Suddenly, we couldn't receive WhatsApp messages. We couldn't upload that photo to Instagram. And in some areas of the world, the internet didn't work at all. So you might remember that Monday when you made more phone calls than on New Year's Eve. For many, that was Black Monday. And I'm not talking about the one in 1987. The fact is that the crash was attributed to human error. From then on, there was a chain of errors and of course, a quick fix. It's like when you drop a roll of toilet paper and you try to fix it up by re-rolling it. It never turns out the same. Well, it took up to 6 hours of hard work in Palo Alto to get everything working again. Then, finally, 2.7 billion people breathed a sigh of relief and got back to their lives as normal. But here, on VisualPolitik, we got thinking about this. Cyber attacks surge in the first half of 2021. Ransomware attacks dominate, report finds. We'll talk about this more in detail later, but the question is out there. What would happen if one day a cyber attack occurred that left us without the internet? Imagine 24 hours without connection. I'm sure many of you already do a lot of your transactions through a banking app and a lot of online shopping. The internet is essential for many jobs, emails, servers. Imagine if all of that collapsed for days. Are you scared already? Well, you should be. And not just because you'd miss out on VisualPolitik. However, it seems like no politicians seem concerned. Think about it this way. If you look at any election manifesto, you will see that politicians promise investments in citizen safety, road safety, infrastructure, but who bothers to talk about this other infrastructure? The internet today is as important as a motorway. So the question is, how many cyber attacks are there these days? And are we really prepared to deal with them? And more importantly, are our politicians addressing the issue of cybersecurity with the seriousness it deserves? Today, we're gonna answer all of these questions. But first, pop open those browsers and let's look at a little bit of history. Letter of Marque. Today, we're going to travel back in time a few centuries. By the year 1600, the Caribbean was far from being the idyllic paradise to spend a nice holiday that it is today. And not because its paradisiacal beaches were not as wonderful as they are, but mostly because of the small fact that by then, its waters were infested with all kind of pirates, buccaneers, and filibusters that sailed the seas in search of victims to plunder. These days, there are very amusing movies about these pilfering fiends. But the 16th century VisualPolitik would tell you how pirates were a real problem for navigation, the transport of goods, and ultimately trade. In addition, there is another small detail that is often swept under the carpet. That is that many of these pirates were in the pay of some governments. A privateer's patent was the explicit license to steal and pillage that was explicitly granted to a pirate by the king or another ruler. England's King Henry VIII was the first monarch to issue a privateer's patent. It's always the English. But his daughter Elizabeth I turned it into a business by granting the patents in exchange for a share of the booty for the British crown. Sir Francis Drake was the most famous privateer of all, but the French and the Dutch were not that far behind either. It was a textbook case of win-win. Not only did you get these criminals off your shores, but you also launched them directly at your enemies. The idea was clear. The state took advantage of the abilities of certain people to live outside the law, an approach that has survived to the present day. The 20th century is considered the golden age of espionage. Of course, there's James Bond, but then there are the real spies of the Cold War. Incredible stories like those of the Cambridge Five, or the infiltrators who led a double life in the West and drip-fed information to the KGB. They went decades to supply thousands of pages of classified material. Today, things have changed quite a bit. The ability to steal secrets has multiplied exponentially. Chinese hackers who broke into the US Office of Personnel Management in 2014 gained access to the records of 21.5 million people in a single stroke. The single attack was enough to obtain an amount of information that, if printed, would fill an entire fleet of trucks. More recently, there was the attack on SolarWinds, a software manufacturer. Last year, the United States discovered a hacking campaign of gargantuan proportions. A campaign that had been able to penetrate a few government agencies, such as the Department of Justice and the Treasury, for months. And it didn't stop there. There was talk of spying on NATO, the European Parliament, and even AstraZeneca. That's right, AstraZeneca, one of the pharmaceutical companies that developed a vaccine against the coronavirus. Well, they have been spied on too. And many of you will ask, but who on earth was behind the attack on SolarWinds, one of the biggest hacks in history? Well, the White House has no doubts, the Nobelium Group. And who is the Nobelium Group? Well, supposedly, we're talking about a body of hackers in the pay of Russia. This is how clearly Dick Durbin, one of the most prominent senators of the Democratic Party, spoke about the issue.
Russia is relentlessly trying to invade America's cyberspace and to compromise individual identities as well as critical and sensitive information. We can't be buddies with Vladimir Putin and have him at the same time making this kind of cyber attack on America. This is virtually a declaration of war by Russia.
But hold on a minute, because Russia is not the only country paying hackers. On VisualPolitik, we've already told you about North Korean and Chinese hackers. And no, we're not talking about any rumors here. Check this out. North Koreans charged in 1.3 billion cyber hack spree. And I know what many of you are going to say. All right, Grant, always picking on the same countries. Is the United States really blameless? Not really. As you can imagine, this is war. And in war, everyone attacks everyone else. Check this out. A Trickbot assault shows US military hackers growing reach. We are talking about Cyber Command, a Pentagon command that constructs cyber operations to neutralize new threats. As you can see, there is a war going on in cyberspace that we are virtually unaware of, but in which the states are involved. These are shadowy movements that remind me a lot of the Warlord movie. And many of you will be thinking, okay, Grant, tell me more. What have been the major coup of these modern day secret agents and criminal gangs? What tools do they use? Let's take a look at that now. All aboard! If you want to rob banks, you have to go one by one. If you want to hack online, you can try to launch thousands of cyber attacks at the same time. For example, some techniques, such as the so-called jackpotting, have served to turn some people into gold. Jackpotting consists of manipulating ATMs so that they start spitting out banknotes as if it were the Central Bank of Venezuela. And believe me, there have been cases. Look at what happened 3 years ago to Cosmos Bank, a bank in India. Cosmos Bank loses $13.5 million in cyber attack. To make this hacking possible, the hackers organized multiple cash withdrawals with local mafias across 28 countries. We're talking 15,000 transactions in just 2 hours. Not bad, huh? Well, that's nothing compared to what is considered the biggest cyber heist in history, the assault on the Central Bank of Bangladesh. In 2016, hackers gained access to the Bangladesh Central Bank's SWIFT instructions. SWIFT is the system banks use for international transfers. The goal? To make fraudulent transfers worth $1 billion from an account the Bangladesh Central Bank held at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to various banks in Asia. In the end, they stole $81 million, and the trail went cold in the casino of the Philippines. It is believed that the North Korean Lazarus Group is behind these cyber attacks. And some will say, okay, but this is happening in Bangladesh. Surely, in the West, there is much tighter security. Okay, first of all, let me remind you that I'm only talking about the major hits of the last few years. And then, let me point out that the cyber threat exists for all financial institutions. This was made clear by Citigroup CEO Jane Fraser when she was asked about cyber attacks in an online appearance before the US Senate in May.
It's one that keeps all of us up at night as one of the greatest risks to the financial system right now.
But wait a minute, because it's not just banks that are being targeted by cybercriminals. Other companies and public institutions are also being targeted by ransomware attacks. That is, data hijacking. We are talking about cyber attacks in which the victim's files are blocked until a ransom is paid, almost always in cryptocurrencies, for the hackers to provide the decryption key needed to restore the files. And what can I say? You have to admit, for them, the pandemic has been a perfect fit. It is estimated that hackers took around $350 million in cryptocurrency payments in 2020. This is 4 more times than previous years. The growth of teleworking has made ransomware attacks easier, giving criminals many more opportunities to work their way into corporate networks. In addition, as backups become prevalent, ransoms are now demanded to prevent hijacked information from becoming public. But what is the outcome of all these cyber attacks? Well, on the one hand, we are talking about significant economic damage. The Danish shipping company MARQUE estimated the losses suffered by a cyber attack in 2017 at $300 million. But there is more. For example, hackers made industrial secrets of a Taiwanese manufacturer that works for Apple public on the internet. Apple refused to pay a $50 million ransom, so the hackers kept the diagrams of the MacBook Pro. In the case of the cyber attack on Irish hospitals, it was a complete disaster. All appointments were frozen. Doctors had no access to patients' medical records. Threats were made to disclose the stolen confidential data if $20 million was not paid. A chaos that forced the Irish healthcare system to go back to pen and paper for a while. It took several weeks to recover. But wait a minute, because the cyber attack on the local police in Washington was even worse. Ransomware hackers claim to leak 250 gigabytes of Washington, D.C. police data after cops don't pay $4 million ransom. Imagine everything that would come to light. Personal data of agents, identities of informants, data of police informants. In short, ransomware is proving to be one of the main threats of digitization. It even threatens viral infrastructure for the energy sector. For example, in May of 2021, hackers paralyzed the Colonial Pipeline, the most important pipeline for the east coast of the United States. They got a ransom of over $4 million. And many of you are thinking, all right, Grant, this is how they attack us. So how are we defending ourselves? Check this out. A few good white hats and a fistful of dollars. Cyber risk has tripled since 2013, expanding the activities and industries that have become vulnerable. And we need to think long and hard about this. Fundamentally, because if one thing has been proven, it is that nothing is beyond the reach of hackers. Recently, it was an oil pipeline, but who knows what could be next? Control over air traffic? The reactor of a nuclear power plant? Any incident of any severity could paralyze much of the economic activity. But wait a minute, because this could get worse in the near future. More and more devices are becoming connected. Household appliances, homes, cars. It's the so-called Internet of Things. This is what 5G has been developed for. And of course, the question is, what will happen if a hacker takes control of our car, of our house? Beware of that. Fortunately, as you can see, for the moment, hackers prefer to dedicate themselves to extorting banks and multinationals. And one of the most commonly used formulas to protect themselves is the one offered by white hats. This is how ethical hackers are known in the hacking world, and they are dedicated to testing the defenses of their own systems. In addition, companies are taking these threats more and more seriously. That's why they are investing more and more money in cybersecurity. Even so, the results aren't really satisfactory. Billions spent on US defense failed to detect giant Russian hack. The truth is that something is not working. Microsoft estimates the annual spending on antivirus software, firewalls, and the like was around $124 billion in 2020. That's 64% more than 5 years ago. And yet attacks are multiplying year on year. So what can we do then? Well, ever since they crippled the Colonial Pipeline, the US is taking cyber attacks as a national security threat. In his last meeting with Putin, US President Biden listed 16 types of infrastructure that he didn't want to see more cyber attacks against. And then Cyber Command is going on the attack. Remember REvil? That's the group of Russian hackers who were demanding 50 million euros from Apple and were doing a lot of data hijacking. Well, they've been taken out. US allied nations force REvil, a ransomware group, offline. Report. There are different approaches outside the United States. France is another of the countries hardest hit by ransomware attacks. And there, they are putting the role of insurers at the center of the debate. Many companies are looking to cover their backs and are taking out insurance. According to Germany's Munich Re, the global cyber insurance market is worth $7 billion and could reach $20 billion by 2025. This is precisely the problem. It's easier for insurers to pay a ransom than to cover losses due to data hijacking. In France, therefore, they see a pull effect that they want to nip in the bud. In an appearance before the French Senate, Joanna Bruce, the public prosecutor responsible for the fight against cybercrime, called on companies and insurers to change their approach to ransom payments.
Faire comprendre à chacun que s'il paye la rançon, ça va pénaliser tous les autres parce que les hackers vont s'en prendre plus facilement à notre tissu économique en se disant les Français, de toute façon, c'est bien connu, ils payent. Ça, c'est indispensable pour tarir la source et pour que les hackers aient conscience que la France c'est pas la poule aux œufs d'or et qu'il ne faut pas nous attaquer.
This discourse has already garnered positive responses. AXA, France's leading insurance company and one of the world's largest, has stopped issuing cyber insurance policies for the French market that reimburse customers for ransomware ransom payments. It is still too early to say whether this decision will produce results, but it has always been said that you don't negotiate with terrorists, that you don't accept blackmail. So why should cyber attacks be treated any differently? And now the question is over to you. Do you think this stance of not paying ransom that the French authorities are promoting is the correct one? Or do you think the work of elite units like the Cyber Command will yield more results? You can leave your answer in the comments below for a small fee of 500 crypto coins. And of course, don't forget that we have new videos every week, so subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it so we can see, and I'll see you next time.